Hello, I'm Ali Pitts, and welcome to this special November 2025 episode of a Russian and Soviet movie podcast. For a wee bit of a change of pace, this time around I'm discussing a book rather than a film. And that book is Not Russian by Mikhail Shevelev, published in English in 2023 by Europa Editions. As I get into in the episode, in form and content with its flashbacks, non-linear narrative and sardonically quipping protagonist, it's very much in the classic film noir tradition, both in form and content. Kudos to Brian James Bear and Ellen Vayner for conveying that delicious and murky noir-y goodness in their translation. I found Not Russian somewhat reminiscent of Tarkovsky's Mirror in its examination of recent history and memory in Russia and the wider region, but as a novel from 2016 as opposed to a film from a Soviet film studio in the mid-70s, it can afford to be much more explicit in its politics. If it were ever to be adapted for the screen, I'd pick Andrei Zvyagintsev, the filmmaker behind Leviathan, Elena and Loveless, to direct it. So, what's the book about? In Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes, the film noir private eye character Tracer Bullet, and here I'm paraphrasing from memory, puts it this way. I took this case because I got bills to pay. Namely Bill, my divorce lawyer, and Bill, my bookmaker. Well, we've all got bills to pay, and therefore compromises we feel we must make. Not Russian explores those compromises and where they can lead a society, and indeed the world. For a freewheeling conversation about this gripping book, I'm joined by Cameron Lallana of the Slavic Literature Pod. I had a great time chatting with Cam, and I'm also grateful to him for doing the edit and mixing on our conversation as well. I'm releasing this on 30th of November 25, and so I'm extremely cognizant that you may well be listening to this well into the festive film season, or indeed later, but never mind. All will become clear why I'm getting this episode out so late. If you stick around at the end of the episode, I'll tell you more about that and the future of the show. Before we get cracking, in tribute to my literary podcast collaborator, and because we mention Mikhail Bulgakov's Heart of a Dog in passing during the discussion, I wanted to share this wonderful, highly relatable line from the Kiev-born author's novella, which was rejected for publication by Soviet authorities in 1925, but made the rounds in samizdat form for years before it was officially published during the Glasnost period. Quote, "She can't afford to go into the restaurant on 60 rubles a month and go to the cinema as well. And cinema is a woman's one consolation in life." End quote. On that note, pull down the Venetian blinds, don your fedora, pour yourself a glass of something potent, might I suggest Armenian brandy if you can get hold of it, crack your world-weariest witticism to the bemusement of whoever you live with. It's time for my conversation with Cameron Lallana on Mikhail Shevelev's Not Russian.
Okay, Ali, how are you doing today?
I am doing all right, Cameron. It's been such a long time. We said before the recording, Skolka let, skolka zim. Yeah, which is one of those very confusing ones when you're first learning Russian, because it's like so many years, and it's like, no, this is because it's so many summers, so many winters.
Winters. Yeah. Yes. And then I made the mistake of counting how many summers and how many winters, and it's been a while since you had a podcast of a completely different name. Well, roughly a different name, and last time we talked.
Well, so did you. You had a very different name. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually had a much sharper change.
Yeah, mine was kind of like a gradually added more words to it for like SEO reasons, and then just dropped the original title because it's just like, nope, that is conveying the wrong messages at this juncture.
Yeah, and then someone told us, funny name on our end. I have no idea what that means or what this podcast is about. And we said, I guess you probably should give people an impression of what exactly they're going to be clicking on.
Yeah. No, it was clear to me. I'd like when I first discovered it, I was like, oh, I'm going to want to listen to that. But it just means that there's fewer opportunities to make jokes about kumis. And... Well,
maybe that should be the new, because now that Matt's not here to say, hey, we can't, this is not professionally accurate, we should not be doing that. I can bring it back too. Because I don't drink that much anymore. but maybe it's okay if it's kumis and I'm just getting a little tipsy, appropriately tipsy off of kumis every episode and rate that. That would be a good tipsy Tolstoy. And it'd be relevant. Why is Tolstoy tipsy? Because of 8 bowls of kumis.
It's just like how peasants got through the Middle Ages, and it was small beer all the way. Everyone is just ever so slightly sloshed in perpetuity.
And that's why the world is the way it is now, because we're not allowed to have a couple small beers to get it through the workday.
No, that is frowned upon. Although hearing some old war stories from colleagues of a certain vintage of just the liquid lunches, it's like, that was Britain pre Margaret Thatcher.
I don't know if this make you feel better or worse, but I've got friends who work in politics and friends who work in research science, and they both have just a whole workplaces who drink on the job like all the time, which is very concerning for both of those environments.
A little bit.
Right. You think we're working in marketing? You think we should be allowed to drink a little on the job? We're writing.
Yeah.
They're trying to cure cancer. But anyway, that's not the point of this podcast. The point of this podcast is talking about the book Not Russian by Mikhail Shevelev. Ali, I've got to give you credit. You were the one who chose this when we first started talking. You're like, I'd like to talk about this book.
You have a different color. You have a blue one.
Oh, I have a
okay. Like, for the benefit of this audio medium, it's almost identical, except mine is red, because presumably because I'm in Britain, having like a red cover with just something about Russia is fine, because it just triggers people's memories. Whereas like red and Russia in the US, it's just like, oh, is this a communist book? Careful now.
Right.
Oh, yeah. So. No, this was one that just so I'm assuming based on the bookmark that I picked this up in Topping and Company in Bath. Possibly, I'm sure that's where it was. But yeah, also bookmarks they get everywhere, like sand in the Phantom Menace. I don't know. Sorry,
right.
I'm in a weird mood.
Yeah.
But yes, and it was just like, oh, I have to read that, and then I read a little bit about the author, and just went, oh yeah, that's going on my infinite to read pile, and I actually got to it fairly quickly.
It's amazing, and that never happens.
Well, this is the thing, is for your audience, Cameron, is my kind of main interest is film, and so I have a big eyes are bigger than my stomach problem when it comes to books, and I am incapable of going into an independent bookshop without purchasing something. It just feels like very rude. It's just like extremely bad form, and and I have to live up to like the middle class British stereotypes in some ways. So no, it's bad form, and yes.
Yeah.
So it does mean that the unread book piles up, but it's very nice and concise. I mean, I don't want to be negative about massive tomes, because this is clearly the wrong crowd for that. And, and I have read some of those massive Russian and, wider, neighboring countries. There's advantages to going long, but there is also brevity as the soul of wit. Also. Yes. If you have a sharp point to make, 800 pages is not usually. 800 pages is, I got a lot of points. I don't really know where I'm going. We're going to see what happens. And you can, and if you're a count who basically, doesn't have to work for a living, and you can just spend, every other chapter being an essay on history and how the universe works. It's just like, some of us have deadlines and bills to pay. Just need to get this thing out of the door.
I know. I have I've got an internal conflict where I grew up reading those big thick books, and I love them. I love being able to sit down with them. But as a now, after doing this literary podcast for almost 5 years now, I see a short book. I'm like, oh, thank God. All right, I have to blow up my life for the next 2 weeks to get this episode out.
Yeah, and yes, such as, and because of the nature of my work is staring at a computer most of my work day. I'm just, by the time I get to the end of the day, I'm kind of read out, and just reading for pleasure is like, I wish I could do more of this. So I have taken to like extremely short novels and also short stories. And just because like those I can manage, whereas if it's like, oh yeah, this novel is 500 pages, it's like, you're going to get like 70 pages deep, and then just life is going to intervene. And,
right.
And then you're going to forget what happened in those first 70 pages, and you're going to have to start again, and it's going to all get very Sisyphean.
Yeah, that's... it's funny. I feel like when we were talking about this originally, we kind of realized that we'd switched a little bit. Where you're like, I'm trying to read more, and as a consequence of reading not very good copy all day, now I'm like, I don't want to read anymore. I'm gonna go watch a movie. So I'm like, I was like, picture like, should we watch a movie? Like, I've really gotten to movies lately, and you're like, no, I really like. I'd love to read. I've got this book in mind.
Well, and we've sort of compromised because the genre of this book, and this is one where I'm just like, again, the fickle memory, it's going to be a theme, is I don't know whether I came to the conclusion that this was like a noir book myself, or whether I was just skimming through the back page and looking at the categorization, which says literary fiction, popular fiction, narrative non-fiction, travel, memoir, world noir, because we all love a subgenre, and it's just like, however it happened, it's just like, oh yeah, this is what this is. This is super noir, and all being well, this will come out in November, which for film Twitter people, Twitter RIP. For again, this is an audio medium, but Cameron just crossed himself. I will doff my cap, which I'm not. It's a shapko shanka, of course it is. My imaginary hat is a shapko shanka. Right. Anyway, yes. Noirvember.
I will say it is like a mystery. It's like a slowly unraveling. Not like you've got an intrepid detective like going through and getting the story out of everyone, but there is a story here which is hidden and which explains everything, and most people are not in the loop. So you've got this guy kind of just trying to make his way through a very rough and tumble world, little different, rough and tumble for different reasons than the typical noir novel, but rough and tumble in a way we'd recognize much better as Pavel is trying to uncover the truth here, basically. Not that he's intending to, but he does.
Yes, and also he's a very world-weary narrator, and it's a first-person narration, which is what makes it, for me, like, so noir-y. That and the sardonic quips. Because this is one of the things that kind of, like, generally speaking, in film, like, narration is slightly frowned upon because it's just like, well, show, don't tell. But noir is sort of the genre that goes, yes, but there's rules are there to be broken, and just having that kind of like literary, and that's one of the things I love about film, is that it's like a composite art form, and you can just kind of cram all these things from different genres and kind of make them work for the story you're telling. And conversely, it's like frequently a compliment to literature. It's like if you describe a book as cinematic, is kind of like, that just means the descriptions are really good and it's vivid.
Right. Yeah.
So this book is very cinematic in several ways.
Cinematic and bring, I'd say probably it helps that one of the things, this is kind of like a tangential point, but this book is very heavily mired in Russian recent history, not like far back history and current events. And I think when you're reading this, you don't need to know like the history of the Chechen wars. You don't need to know about the apartment bombings. You don't need to know what like Ostankina Tower is necessarily. But if you do know those things when you're reading this, you're going to be like we'll talk about the plot in a second, but it begins on a terrorist attack, a people being 100-something people being shepherded into a church, or maybe they're already there and it was during a service, and masked gunmen having their demands read out. And if you read that and recent Russian history, you think, oh, Beslan. That's your immediate thought, and then you might remember the TV footage, whatever else, like however you encountered Beslan. And then in the book, they're like, this is just like Beslan. This is like, it makes sense. It's mired in that history and it brings it up. It's not just alluding to it. It is positioned as a book in this history, which we have lived through.
Yeah, there's very much that ripped from the headlines quality. And you were going to say a little bit about the author's biography as well, which I think is possibly fresher in your mind than it is in mine, because you're a consummate professional and I'm me.
No, it's just like this, like, who is this person writing this? That's my always question. And this is actually a hard one to answer a little bit, because I did a little bit of Googling and, Googling in English and in Russian, and there's not a lot about Shevelev. I found his Facebook page, and I kind of was reading the last couple, and he posts a lot. Some relevant to current events, some not. Didn't end up having too much bearing on this novel, but I will be honest, I am stealing this. I'm going to give you a background of him from Europa Editions, because that was like the most complete background I could find on him. Born in 1959. He's a graduate of the Moscow Institute of Foreign Language in 1981. He has worked as a translator and interpreter, former deputy editor for the Moscow News. He's also wrote as a freelance journalist for Radio Liberty and I think Radio Svoboda, a couple other ones. I've seen him. I've seen him tied to different websites. After 2014, as it says, he's not collaborated with Russian state and private media. I don't know where he lives right now. I saw I think it was a website which tracked cases against journalists, like free speech issues, and that one mentioned that he does not currently live in Russia. I could not find that corroborated anywhere. You may know the answer to that.
I don't, but I would say it's a pretty safe assumption that he does not live there anymore, because, given clearly his politics and his journalistic history, it would not be a wise health decision.
Yep. Yeah, and so I was gonna say that's why I agree. I think that was my similar assumption. I couldn't find no evidence for where he lives. Probably also a safe move.
Yeah.
Of that not being readily accessible.
Yeah.
He's written other books. He's written short stories. They've been translated to other languages, and he won the Isaac Babel Prize in 2021. That is, unless you want to go into like Google his name in Russian, find his Facebook page, and read his posts. That's at least what I could mostly like. That's probably Europa Editions had like the best concise version with a couple extra notes I found out there.
Yeah, no, but that's great. That's great context, and I think it's again a reasonable assumption to say this book feels extremely autobiographical.
Mm-hmm. It has a lot to do with working in news media. I'd say, I don't want to get too into it. Maybe we'll talk about this more later, but I do think it's worth pointing out. So this was published in Russian in 2015. So this is after, the annexation of Crimea. This is after, obviously, the Chechen Wars. This is after the invasion of Georgia. But this is before the full, and after also the kind of the little green men entering Ukraine, but not... Obviously, this was published in English in 2022. So the English publication comes after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but the original book did not. Although you'd be forgiven for thinking that it was published after the war, because credit to Shevelev, he treats it as, in 2015, he was writing about it as a war. When a lot of people, I think, when we generally spoke about it as a civil war with maybe the Russian, maybe, heavy quotes, they're like, the Russian state's probably, is sending military equipment and men and, support there. But generally the media environment was, let's call it a civil war, even though it's being funded and equipped from the outside. And from this book, he's like, no, this is an invasion. This is a war.
Yeah. I mean, my last year living in Russia, I lived there was 2014, and yeah, that was a time that year. And
Yeah.
again, to put in some personal autobiography, is that almost the whole time I lived there, I was an English language teacher, and in the middle, I was a like full-time student of Russian. But at the very end, I was trying to transition out into something that wasn't English teaching, and that thing was being a translator. I was probably like 7 months in the end. Worked for the news agency Interfax, which I don't know if it even still exists, and if it does exist, it will have been like totally taken over. But it kind of had its roots in the late 80s, like glasnost period, and so it was kind of its existence was a legacy of that, like, we need to open up and actually hold the powers that be to account. But yeah, so I was working there at the time of the annexation, and also the MH17 flight being shot down, and the Russian state being like, nothing to do with us. And I remember in like the courtyard near my metro station, there being like flags up for like the Donetsk in support of the Donetsk People's Republic. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm sure that just appeared there on its own. Anyway, yeah. I mean, there's no way that this episode is not going to get political, because it's just the nature of the story. It as well as you were saying. It's like a bit of a potted history, but it relates to that whole old saw of, well, journalism is the first draft of history.
Right.
And it's like, this guy has just been following what's going on the whole time, and gets into his like feelings about having lived through all of that. Should we give like a potted like plot summary without going too spoiler heavy?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a plan. I think, like we discussed, and if you're worried about spoilers, we're going to be talking about a lot of the book where spoilers don't matter, to be frank. Like it is him fighting at the truth, but I'd say there is one big thing that really does matter to you if you care about spoilers towards the end of the book, which we'll not talk about until the very end. So for this section, we're just going to be talking about stuff which you could readily understand and get from like the moment you open up the first chapter of this book, which is the basic idea is that you've got a veteran journalist, Pavel Vladimirovich. I should have written his last name down. I always just write the first name, patronymic. Pavel Vladimirovich. He's awoken essentially, and I think it's the middle of the night. His wife is like, you need to come look at this. And he goes over and he's like getting all kinds of phone calls, and he sees in the TV this guy, Vadik, who's named Vadim Petrovich, who is on TV and saying, we've taken over this church. There are 100 people inside. I want to talk to Pavel Vladimirovich, and I want to talk to this other guy named Zhenya. And Pavel's like, what's going on? And as he's trying to get ready, he gets called by the military. You say, we've got a car for you. Get down here. Get over there. And as he does that, he is sent inside. He begins to learn more and more about what led Vadik, who is, in the beginning when you read it, he's surprised he's even alive because he's dropped out of Pavel's life, a decade and a half ago. What led him from their initial meeting as a quote-unquote POW in Chechnya, why that's quote-unquote we'll get to later, to now holding up, having a leading group of armed men into a church in this suburb of Moscow. What that was like, and Zhenya also being a part of that story, which is why he's was asked for as well. And the rest of the story deals with like what comes next as he kind of goes in and goes out and tries to relay what Vadik wants and how the world outside responds. Is there anywhere you want to start in here? There's a lot of different ways. We've kind of been. I feel like we've been setting up a lot of the stuff we want to talk about going into this.
Yeah. So it's a really quite unusually structured novel in that you have like this initial inciting incident, then we go back and we spend like there's a long section where we go back to 1996 where Pavel, like our narrator, meets Vadik in Chechnya, and that takes a long time to set that, to understand that bit of the story, and then after that, it's much shorter. It's kind of like 5-6 page sections, and again, this kind of makes it slightly like noir-y. You're doing like time jumps. You're jumping back to like the 1980s when Pasha is, a student at Moscow University, and then you're jumping back to the 90s, and I mean maybe it doesn't follow this exact sequence, and then it'll be like, and then it's at these different times during this day as well, and it's the structure is like it's incredibly effective because you never get lost, but it's also just helping you build that jigsaw and understand how did we get here, both in terms of like this specific situation, but also the more kind of like macro historical geopolitical plight that we as humanity in a way are in. So it's kind of sort of a microcosm of the whole, I suppose you could say.
Right. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because yes, it does it makes me step back and look at my own history in kind of the same way. It does like this really effective moment of, I'm trying to figure out the words for this. It's like Pavel, you get the sense, has just been kind of living his life. He's just basically trying to survive. And then this incident brings up his history and makes him like reflect on all of these things. And suddenly has this kind of, not revelation, but like this catalyst towards like, I've been keeping my head down for so long and now I can't do that anymore. And I think this, like, it does that. So it does that in such a way that makes me look back at my own past too. And think, am I living on autopilot in the same way? Because you have, like you mentioned, this really cool chapter structure where it's most of them are just times, like 10:34, 11:24, which is what's happening in the actual action. The story takes place starts at like 10:34 one night, and it ends on 12:49 a.m., which would be like, I guess, the second day from the initial incident. Basically, a little over 24 hours. And in between that, you're jumping back in the past. But each one it's not like a random insertion. For the most part, it is, and you might fact check me on this because I didn't have this thought until after I was done reading the book. They are mostly triggered by something in that story. Pavel remembering something, Pavel having a conversation, and like, okay, this is the conversation we had, and this is what it reflected, the period reflects on us, or someone reminds Vadik of something. So even though you are like jumping back and forth, you really get the sense that, we're always in the present and just remembering something or having a conversation, which brings us back to a piece of information we didn't know about that. Which I think you've made this point that it feels like very noir-y, these like this quick turnarounds, this jumping between the past and the present, like, oftentimes who are these noir protagonists? And this we have like the super version of that, which is not only do we have this protagonist who's like kind of hiding himself from the world, but a protagonist who's hiding himself from himself, because that's how he's gotten by so far.
Yeah, and it's kind of like I can't say this word, unfortunately, without thinking of Tom Hardy in Dark Knight Rises, but it's like a reckoning.
Right.
I mean, I think some of it is he's thinking like I've always felt somewhat complicit, but this really sort of brings it home, and he talks a few times about what a like dirty business journalism has become, And I guess thematically, some of it is about disappointment with how things have turned out, but also how people have turned out.
Right.
Because we have a couple of his well, whether you even count them as whether he even counts them as friends at the time that the narration is happening, but people who he would have considered friends at one point, like Zhenya is like who's his kind of fellow quote unquote rescuer of Vadik, and this is one of the things that's really endearing is that Vadik, this kind of like when we first meet him, hardened terrorist leader. You find out that when he met Pavel, our protagonist, and Yevgeny, he calls them Uncle Pasha and Uncle Zhenya, and sort of because of this, and this is another of the themes that I think is in the book, is like the underestimating of people, because that's a thing that comes to Pasha is just like, oh, I did not realize this guy was capable of this, but also that also relates to, we get a bit about Pasha meeting Putin in the mid-90s when he's like deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, and he's just this sort of like semi-anonymous functionary who's like very nice and polite and like helpful and just kind of like, okay, well that guy was all right, and just like what he turned into when ambition enabled him to get there, and again, ambition is another theme and where that can lead you, because one of the things in Pasha's like self-reckoning and like national reckoning is around like who we tell ourselves we are, and who we tell ourselves we are as like journalists. And Vadik is like, yeah, you never cared about me. We were me and the other guys you were rescuing, we were a good story to you. And Pasha is essentially like, yeah, that's not totally fair, but it's mostly fair. Not that he says this to Vadik as dialogue, right, but we get so much of his interior monologue, and it's just like, yeah, mostly guilty as charged.
He's like, look, it was the right thing to do. It was also a really good story.
Yeah,
but it was the right thing to do.
Isn't it nice when what is the right thing to do and is great a great career move happen to be the same thing, and it kind of goes into a wider like reckoning on essentially the Russian intelligentsia and like one break from this the structure of this is happening right now, or here's a flashback to whatever period in time, is there's a chapter called That's Right, which I would describe, if this isn't a contradiction in terms, as like an extremely eloquent howl of anguish.
Yep, yeah.
It's just like, why does my country have to suck so much? And why do we, as like educated Russians who have like made it in the new Russia, or like, you know, got ourselves established in like respectable professional careers, why were we just like ignoring what was going on in our peripheral vision, essentially, and just the lives that of the people who weren't doing well out of the new system, and how we basically just, I mean, essentially the you could read the book quite easily as like a critique of neoliberalism.
Yeah, right.
Which turns out, spoiler alert, is not that liberal.
Right. About as liberal as the Russian Liberal Democratic Party.
Oh yeah, Zhirinovsky. Yes, I don't think he gets a mention, but
No.
Zyuganov,
Zyuganov
the leader,
does,
and he's
yeah.
literally described as that cannibal.
Right. Like standing in Putin's shadow.
Yeah.
What was it? I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
Yeah, and basically like Zyuganov making Yeltsin look like the good option, and again they don't say this in the text, but like the lesser of two evils is still evil.
Right. Yeah. I think that's exactly right, because to me, when I was reading this book, we get that classic question, still deal out what is to be done, like the eternal question of Slavic literature. Well, this is I think this book poses the corollary, which we don't talk about quite as much, but is often there. Who is to blame? Like you've been saying.
the other classic one. Yeah, Kto vinovat. Yeah.
And it's you're exactly right. This is like a book of the Russian elite looking in on itself and being like, who is to blame? Is it Putin? Is it Zyuganov? Is it Yeltsin? Is it us? And the answer to all the above is kind of yes. But I think it does a good job in trying to be like, well, we all like trying to be specific in the ways that they have all contributed to this. It actually, when I was reading this, have you ever read Zakhar Prilepin?
No.
Okay. This reminded me a lot of, not like, I think there's no real connection between this and the book Sankhya, but it did remind me, because Sankhya is essentially also a book whose main questions are who to blame and what to do. And that one is written in the early 2000s about a young man who's like underneath these kind of elite professionals, the news people, the academics. They're all beating his head down, saying, you're wrong, and they're right. They're like, no, you're wrong because you're an anti-Semite, and he's like, no, the Jews are taking over. And so you read the book and you're like, okay, so these people like knocking down this guy, they're right, he is the terrible person. But he ends that book on like, okay, I'm going to throw off the yoke of these professionals by killing them. I'm going to invade Parliament. We're going to kill Putin. We're going to, this guy, this academic of this whole book, he's been getting down on me. I'm going to throw him out a window. That's fine. I may not be smarter than you, but I can throw you out a window. And so this is kind of like, and the irony is Zakhar Prilepin is now in politics as an ally of Putin. 20 years ago, and I think this book, this reminds me of Sankhya, not because it's like literally connected, but because it's kind of asking the same questions, but from the perspective of the professional class who Sankhya was trying to kill. And now people, I can't say this universally, but, Zakhar Prilepin and a lot of people of his ilk went on from, we need Russia to be a national socialist state, which is blood and soil. But then he went on to, okay, now we need to take Ukraine back. It's part of our empire. And now I'm in politics. And now I'm like supporting, like that old underclass is now in power. And now these people who, like the people who were the enemies in Sankhya, now those are the people in Not Russian being like, what happened? And the book is it kind of acknowledges that, like, now they're under the boot of thugs, essentially. But, as you were saying earlier, of like, they didn't start out this way. And that's the real problem of, well, they were very nice to me once. I like that you mentioned that Pavel has dinner with Putin, and the dinner is like nice, but it's also really off-putting because it's, let me read the quote. Putin began by telling us a story, a long, tedious, plotting story about his recent trip to Israel. He informed us that he went with his family, that he loved everything in Israel very much, and that there were such wonderful people in that country. The first year of the higher school of the KGB, you take a course, the fundamentals of recruiting. If you see two Jews, start talking about Israel's achievements. I mean, what else could be of interest to those people? Before I got totally drunk, I tried to think what he'd be talking about if Rabinovich and I were Kazakh. The next morning, I thought, okay, so this guy just wanted to be nice to us. We'll extend, to the extent that he was able. And I forgot about that evening. It's like, it's nice, but it's very off-putting.
Yeah, because it's just like transparently like manipulative. And this is something obviously we essentially mentioned in passing is Pavel is Jewish, and how complicated that makes his life, and Putin just being like that, just ostensibly nice, but also just like putting people into a box and going, oh yeah, well, all people like that are like that.
Yeah, and having walking away being like, well, he was trying to be nice instead of, that was so off-putting. Like he was just putting spycraft into work just to make us feel welcome. Like what they do that in order to bring us into the fold so they can operate on us and it's like they can manipulate us. Was that being nice, or is that incredibly off-putting because he's trying to treat you like a source or a mark or a turncoat? And then he walks away and says, well, he was trying, as opposed to that was a transparent attempt at manipulation, which I think is like the really interesting question of, this dual who's to blame. On one hand, you've got the people actually operating these levers. And on the other hand, you kind of have the people who run cover for it, which is a lot of what Pavel looking back, or, Shevelev looking at the Russian news media, like we've been talking about, the immense amount of like, well, he was trying, or the not quite covered, because there's this really hits home for me because I was in journalism before, and that one of the eternal problems I have is that there's this dedication to being against bias, being neutral in coverage, which I understand on one level, like that is a great ideal. On the other hand, it then means you have to put transparently like unhinged things and then make them seem less unhinged, because there's some things that are so out of hand, which saying it accurately sounds like you're biased against it. And I would be in these situations where I'd watch a news conference and it'd be something like off the hook. Like this is like looking at it, I was like, this is so off-putting. These are real weird people running this stuff. And then I'd like write it down and someone would be like, I don't know, I don't think that's relevant. We should strike it out. Not because they're like, we need to run cover for these guys, but they're like, well, it's not essential to the core story. Like this is what they wanted. Maybe if they're off-putting on the side and saying these things, that could be relevant, could not be relevant. And so like this dedication to neutrality sometimes means that you edit out the stuff that is off-putting and uncomfortable, just because you kind of question, it's tangential. They're not, whatever they're saying was tangential to the point where they want, and that's the core of the story we're trying to get to. And it kind of is like a lot of this book is examining that, and not only that, but of like this a little bit less. That's more like my own like issues with having worked in journalism, of this obsession with like, okay, we have to be neutral, even if it means we got to walk around what they said, because if we said what they said, it'd make us seem not neutral because that's so unhinged what they said. But also, like you were saying earlier, these career moments, how many of these journalists are so, because we have in, like when you mentioned the chapter, that's right. He says, we're all thinking we're keeping our heads down, but how many of us are lining our pockets in this? Like you say, like, oh, I'm just surviving. The Soviet system was so hard. But Zhenya, you went from this little tiny TV station, Vili Sovremenosti, to Channel 1 in Ostankina Tower. You're doing great. You are at the head of the propaganda machine. I mean, it's not the most propagandistic, but it's Channel 1. I mean, come on.
Well, this is why Uncle Pasha and Uncle Zhenya aren't friends anymore. Is that Pasha thinks he has standards, and like from an objective distance, he kind of does, but also like it's sort of asking that question like, there's more I could have done, but also the cost of doing more, I know what the costs are, because he one of the flashbacks is to the 1980s, as I said, and his student days, where the KGB recruits him and basically make him an offer he can't refuse, and and this is where his Jewishness comes in, is because they're like, again, one of the things that makes this noirish is that sardonic humor, and him kind of like going like, oh, they're gonna be mean to me because I'm Jewish and the Soviet state is anti-Semitic, and then they're quite polite to him, and again, the echoes of the Putin conversation, and essentially his assignment is go to a synagogue and spy on the other members of the congregation. And he's like, oh, right, they could find a use for a Jewish guy. Great. I'm so lucky to have been picked. If it weren't so funny, it would it would be like, I would not recommend it, because it's just like, do you know what? There's enough grim stuff going on
Right.
in our bit of the world. Maybe you don't want to do this to yourself. And that's sort of how it kind of leavens it. And yeah, I think that's one of the things that I enjoyed so much about it's just because it's an important coping mechanism.
Right.
and something that definitely reminded me of one of the things I really loved about my Russian colleagues when I lived out there. It was just so funny.
Yeah.
It's just like, when you live through that history, you need that coping mechanism. And I don't know, I've just written down a couple of good jokes that I just wanted to add in here. At one point, so Tanya is his wife / partner, and so here's the quote. So, quote, "When Tanya starts stuttering, it means things are bad. Under normal circumstances, only Lenin in his coffin is calmer." Did love that.
Yeah.
And then another bit, which is again talking about one of Pasha's ex-friends, really, who we learn is probably dying of cancer. We have the reflection, quote, "How right that man was who said at his 94th birthday party, quote, 'Life, Pasha, is the gradual disappearance of your enemies,'" end quote. I actually lolled when I read that.
Right.
I don't often laugh out loud when I'm reading a book, but
Yeah.
that was
That was a good. And then Pavel makes it very sad by adding after that, if I recall correctly, and also your friends too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. There's also something about like the cyclicality of history, if you like, and that whole history doesn't necessarily repeat, but it does rhyme. And Tanya, when she's reacting to the "That's Right" chapter, which is ostensibly a piece that essentially Pasha has written as he's come home from this initial part of the hostage negotiation, because he's roped in as the negotiator because he's been asked for
Right.
by the leader. He's just so hyped up on adrenaline that he just sits down at his desk and kind of, deals with it. Like, this makes it sound really corny, but deals with it the only way a journalist knows how, and he just and he writes, he just stream of consciousnesses it out, and his partner reacts after he's got it down on paper and says, it's pretty good. Did you need to swear that often? And Tanya is very funny. But one of the things he says says to himself is that he wants to keep it for his son Misha, as Misha might find it useful when the next perestroika happens, which is like, yeah, because there is this when you know your Russian history, you've got glasnost and perestroika under Gorbachev, but you go back further, you've got the Khrushchev so-called thaw. Didn't feel very Thory to the Hungarians, and then you go back further than that to the Alexander II, the so-called Tsar liberator, and he's bookended by Nicholas. Nicholas the First, who is brutal, and his son who responds to Tsar liberator's assassination by going, "Oh, okay, we're just going to be, this is what happens when we liberalize, so it's just going to be maximum authoritarianism," which also gives me an excuse to mention that the book does like a nice little drive-by on Nikita Mikhalkov, who's, very, very talented Russian director, who, again, is one of these people who, like, it's like, the book essentially goes, what happened to you, man?
Yeah.
Because he goes from, in 1994 making Burnt by the Sun, which is like an excoriating critique of Stalinism and what went on then, to essentially being, a mouthpiece for the regime and just taking like his undoubted artistry and using it in the service of evil.
Yeah.
To get moralistic about it, and the clues were there, because if you the Barber of Siberia, which was like I think his follow-up film to Burnt by the Sun. I don't know if you've seen it.
No, I haven't.
It's got a lot going for it. It wasn't nearly as successful and is like a much more flawed film. But in it, Mikhail plays Alexander III, and he has this bit where he's strutting around with these like just graduate, like it's a graduation ceremony for these like Russian military cadets and officers. Yeah, they've just newly minted officers, and he's just like, love the Russian soldier. But he's just strutting around and painting him like, if you don't know anything about Alexander III, you go like, oh, maybe a little bit authoritarian, but like, what do you expect for a Tsar? Tough but fair.
Right.
And it's just like, oh, you admire this guy and are portraying this guy as like good? This gives me pause. And this is like 1998 when this film comes out. So there's like, it was on a trajectory, clearly.
Yeah. That's a great point to bring up, like the what happened to you, because that's, especially for this chapter, that's right. So much of it is like, it's a question of, okay, who's to blame? But also, when do you start becoming the person who is blamed? Like, was there, because he's like, okay, well, we can't just point at all these events because, when did it happen? When they started killing people in Kiev, or when Crimea was occupied, or Donbass, or even earlier when Khodorkovsky was arrested, or when NTV was closed, or was it even earlier than that? The Second Chechen War, the first one, the 1996 elections. If we keep going, we'll soon reach October 1917. And I could be misreading it, but like, it does read to me a little bit like, if we're looking for the moment that like, okay, this is all when it all went bad, we're never going to find that moment, because it's about what we are doing in relation to what is happening, what is always happening. And that's right. I think I like, what happened to you? That is a great question to ask, because that is what happens to so many characters. That Pavel asks out of himself. We get asked that implicitly of what happened to Zhenya, the kind of her, this, when they're thinking back to their youth, they're kind of heroic. Zhenya works for TV, Pavel works for a newspaper, and they're out there, they're in Chechnya all by themselves, just like filming the peace agreements. And then you come back to the present, and when they ask Zhenya to come in, he says, hell no, I'm not getting involved in that. I don't want to die. And Pavel's like, well, they're going to die. And Zhenya says, what is it? It's like, this is war. Oh, he says, this is a war, Pasha. People die during wars, unfortunately. And so he's got this sort of cowardice of like, I don't want to be the one. It's people that die during wars, and I don't want to be the one who dies. And you start looking back at his memories, and you realize like, oh, there was that. Like that, the heroism that was there was a good career move for him, and now it's not anymore.
But you've just reminded me of a Tanya moment where she turns to Pasha and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially says like, it's a good thing that you're a coward, Pasha. And he's like, for a second he's just like mortally wounded. And then she expands her point and goes, no, Pasha, I'm reminding you of a thing that you told me is that somebody who is just not scared when it's clearly an extremely dangerous situation, they're not brave, they're just an idiot. Yeah. like true courage is feeling scared and doing the right thing anyway. Which reminds me of a slightly about like the like ostensible bravery. It reminds me of a thing that they used that I think he was a survivor of the World War One trenches, said like the worst thing that you could have in the trenches was imagination. Like the people who had the least worst time, like day to day, were the people who are just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be all right though. It's just like, do you not see all of this?
Right.
I was like, no, I'm fine. Yeah, it's like at the risk of sounding like grandiose, it's like it's a book about the human condition,
right?
And you can do that as a Russian novel and not be like 500 pages.
Right. You can.
Shall we talk a little bit about again, this feels like super noir tropey, but a priest character?
That's exactly what I want to talk about next. Yeah, thank you for bringing him up first.
Yeah, so that is Sasha, and I thought like maybe Shevelev is missing a trick by not calling him Alexei instead and making him an Alyosha to kind of like link back in with Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah.
But maybe that would have just been like too obvious. He's again one of these characters who's like Pasha's essentially like, Sasha, I thought you were cool, man.
Yeah.
Because they meet in their late teens and kind of like bond over like similar interests. Like they're both into heavy metal, which kudos. As a part-time metalhead myself, and back then you could get in trouble for it.
Right? Yeah, that would have been the '80s for them, probably.
Yeah. Like certainly pre-Gorbachev. It was like, nah. I mean, some of the things that they like write about, like why you shouldn't listen to things, is really, yeah. It's funny how like school marmish the Soviet state got about stuff. It's like, we're good and nice. Also, we're the people who brought you the Gulag.
The Gulag was essential to fight criminals, and that's why we're continuing our fight against heavy metal, which will introduce, I guess it can't be Satanism because we're not a religious state, but like secular Satanism to the youth.
Oh, one of the things they said, I think, was like occult obscurantism.
That's incredible. Okay, so the same thing. They're just trying to do like secular. They literally try to do secular Satanism.
Yeah, it's like, well, that's nonsense. But also, we don't want you listening about it because then you might get some ideas.
Right.
And yeah, it's again one of those like someone making a choice, and it's like, I thought you were a cool priest because
right.
and he becomes like this guy Sasha converts to orthodoxy at a time when that was not a career move, and
right.
And funnily enough, we find out that he got interested because Pasha's dad lent him a Bible that he happened to like, or like presumably like the Hebrew scriptures, and has these kind of like chats with Pasha's dad, and that kind of got him interested, and then he like writes a column for the Moskovsky Courier on like religious affairs, and it all seems like mild-mannered and liberal, and then once you kind of get the Cesaro papism kind of coming back in, there's a reason in the US Constitution you have a separation of church and state, because it's like the Russian state is like an object lesson of like, no, you don't necessarily want official religion going, yes, what the president said.
Yeah. That's the word of God also.
Yes.
We looked it up. We asked the big guy. Yeah, he agrees.
Yeah. and he's totally cool with the big guy formerly being like in the KGB and like the enforcement of like the atheist state. Right. It's forgiveness, right? Bygones be bygones.
Yeah.
It's just ignore that.
Right. I think on one hand you could there's the criticism laid there that, like you're saying, this tie between church and state, not good when, the church gets to say, yep, the state is perfect, God approves of everything. Also, if you're against the state, now you're against God too.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously some issues there. But I think also what that strikes me about it is, like you were saying, that he writes this nice kind of liberal column, and then when the tone starts to shift as a society, he starts writing much more aggressive columns. I don't remember the exact thing, but he writes something which do you remember?
Oh yes, he talks about something being like a conspiracy against the Russian world, which is like one of these like hard right Russian ideological things of just like, and this is why we get to control like all of like the former Russian Empire because they're ours. It's just the Russian world, and they're just, if they think that they're Ukrainians and not little Russians, then just like they're just kidding themselves. And it's just like, well, how come you get to be a real nationality but other people don't? Because there's more of us.
It's conspiracy against us that we are not the dominant ones here.
It's like you're still doing pretty well. Like if you could have a really good country for yourself if you just concentrated on making the most of what you have and not like it's just so obvious it goes without saying. But it's just
you think it'd be so obvious it would go without saying, but it apparently is. Apparently, we need this entire book.
Apparently not. Not. No.
But it's interesting. So after he writes that, Pavel sees him at a party, and he says, the next time I saw him was at a birthday party of the newspaper Kommersant, when I asked him why he did it, and he says to me, when you did what you wanted, we kept quiet. Now it's your turn to watch and envy. So we get the sense that there was always something there in Sasha that like before when the zeitgeist was this polite liberalism, of course I played along. Now we're not in that game anymore, and now I get to work how I would like to, and you have to sit at me. And like and Pavel didn't even know that he was sitting. Apparently, this guy was sitting there like, I can't wait until I can write what I want. And he's turned this around on him and saying that's now you're in my seat. And Pavel's like, I didn't know we were sitting in these seats. I thought we were on the same side here, which I think on two things. Like one, it's criticizing this sort of naive liberalism that existed before, which is, we're all on the same page. We're all working for the same thing. No, there are sharks swimming in your midst, and a lot of them speak your language, literally and also figuratively. But also that we've got two separate sides here from Sasha and Zhenya. And to me, the fact that Sasha is a priest is almost less important than the fact that he's sort of an outsider. He's forgive the pun here, he's not orthodox. He's literally orthodox, but he did not take an orthodox path into what he did. He was a metalhead kid who got into religion when that was really bad for your career, and he stuck through it. He stuck to his guns, and he's like, I'm going to become a priest in the Soviet Union, which was always, was a bad career move. It always was. Versus Zhenya, who's this sort of opportunist moving up. But on either side, between the opportunist and this, not orthodox kind of radical decision this kid's making, they are both supporting the Russian state in their own ways. On one hand, well, I just got to do what's good for my career. On the other hand, I think a genuine belief in this of like, this is what we should do. A genuine belief in this sort of radical idea of like Russian domination, even before that was popular. He was there like that. And I think that what's great about having these two is you see all the different ways, like who is to blame. There's a lot of, on one hand, there's the polite, I think there's a lot of things leveled against like the polite liberal intelligentsia, if they exist, which the book is like, no, intelligentsia is a Soviet fable. We overlooked a lot of things and we never stood up for anything. But also on the side, you've got careerists, you've got these genuine like whack jobs, and they can come from all backgrounds. Just because you're a radical at one point doesn't mean you're going to keep on being like kind of like you're saying with that director. Like you can do great anti-Stalin stuff. That doesn't mean when the next version of it comes around that you're going to still be against it.
Yeah. Oh no. It's not authoritarianism in general. I don't like. I just don't like it when it's communist. It's
right.
Like, when it's like ultra-nationalist, I'm cool with it. It's just like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like, I thought with this movie that you were saying like that, like disappearing people and like beating people up is just bad, whoever's doing it. But like,
yeah,
no. Apparently, when it's the right people,
right.
It's fine. It's just.
Yeah.
And you do wonder with Sasha whether that's he truly was a wrong un the whole time, or whether and yeah, because the line he says about like we bided our time kind of suggests that? Or is it just like no, my new friends are right, like telling himself kind of like whether he's just kind of been like, I don't know, sort of cooked by the circle that it's become expedient for him to hang around with. But yeah, the book does, I like just described him as a wrong un, but like the book is more nuanced than that.
Yes,
like, because Pasha is like, okay, I respect the fact that he actually showed up, even if like maybe he doesn't have that long to live anyway.
Right.
He's essentially going, I don't know what he's going, but he's clearly like really ambivalent, and the fact that that's the line where he says like you're enemies but you're friends too, and clearly like Sasha is kind of both. It's like he really doesn't respect the life choices he's made, but he still feels like that affection for the person that maybe Sasha used to be, maybe still could have been in a more favorable climate, let's say.
Yeah. This book does not run from Pavel's maybe complicity is the wrong word, but he's part of the system. He's not like walking away like, oh, I'm an outsider looking at all these bad things. Pasha, he's part of this. He's realizing that he was like a step away from everyone else. Like he's maybe not the same type of careerist as Zhenya. Maybe he like genuinely had those liberal beliefs, but he's their friends. He thinks they're friends. He wants to be friends. He wants good things for them. Like he's a part of this, for better or for worse.
Yeah, and just the fact that he's doing economically quite right. Well. I have not marked my book well, so you might need to edit around this, but there's a bit in the That's Right chapter where he really sort of like takes himself and people like him to task for their choices, and also kind of like demonstrates a bit more of an understanding of like, well, not excusing them, but still seeing like, okay, maybe if I'd had their circumstances, I would have ended up where they've ended up too. So here it goes. But then Putin came in and spoiled everything. We were very critical of him, of course. We even went to a protest rally in 2012, or was it 2011? But it was all in vain. Time flies so fast and everything gets mixed up. Vacations in Turkey, beer, foreign cars, customer service, it's all true. We got rich, and that was also true. But those who didn't get richer or got poorer, they were just losers. What can you do? Business is tough, but that's how the much coveted capitalist system works, and not everyone reaps the same rewards. And of course, we'd never say the words lowlife and trash out loud. That would be in poor taste. But in reality, ladies and gentlemen, if we look more closely at the excessive cognitive dissonance of Russian society and the civilizing experience of the rest of the world, and of course, we are not unsympathetic to the needs of simple people, we'll donate to Dr. Lisa and we'll find some change for Chulpan Khamatova too. And when it comes to shelter for homeless animals, we collected the money ourselves with our own hands. There was a special charity auction in a really cool place, the Strelka restaurant. Our women donated delicious baked goods. Can you imagine? They baked them themselves. Senya Sobchak hosted the event, and he just like goes on and on of this sort of like self-justifying, like, we're doing really well, and we kind of like, we're charitable, like, as long as it doesn't kind of like hurt us economically or cost us. And at the same time, they're just looking down on the people who haven't made it and just going like, that's their fault, like, and rather than going, I don't know, maybe swinging so hard from like command economy communism to just this incredibly like Hobbesian version of ultra capitalism who like people who aren't successes are just like failures and trash and lowlives, and just being like, well, that's a very convenient set of beliefs for you who's like pretty pretty close to the top. And then he goes on to say about like just looking at the like so-called, I mean, he doesn't use the term in the book, like the new Russians, like i.e. the oligarchs. And it's like essentially the self-righteousness of going like, those guys over there who are just like hugely rich, those guys are the bad people, we're fine. And it's just going like, yeah, you don't have to say those guys are not what they were, like a bunch of thieves, but also like, you also were down with this, like, oh yeah, we're going to have this tiny tax rate and we're just going to like sell everything off and just, again, like be totally fine with the market just doing what it's going to do. Sorry, this is turning into like a very leftist diatribe on my part, but it's just like the pendulum swung very hard the other way, and this was one of the like the most eye-opening things about living in Russia in my like mid 20s, was just hearing from people like how much the 90s had sucked. And yeah, whereas the 90s in the UK, pretty good for quite a lot of people. It's more complicated than that because we had Thatcherism, which was not good. But also we were starting from a much more elevated economic place to fall back from. And then we had a government that wasn't like totally, oh, let's dismantle everything and just give it all to the like most ruthless. Sorry, I'm descending into like semi-coherence. But
no, it's right. It's like funny because you get back to like, it reminds me of like late like Russian Empire literature, where this is like, it's dealing with the same problem where you like, what is to be done? Like, oh, maybe we got a lot of people who are bad off, and maybe that's not a personal problem. Maybe that's because of a bad environment. And now you've come back around to like, okay, so now that we're under capitalism, if you do badly, it is your fault. you weren't there to take advantage of your opportunities. You didn't job train enough. You didn't get enough skills. You were, they're like, oh, it's a bad taste to call them a loser, but maybe they should have tried a little harder. Maybe they should have had better schooling. Maybe they should have had better connections. And they wouldn't say that, of course, but like they say,
yeah, and yeah, it's like when you do look down your nose at people, and those people get angry and because of their lot in life, and like support the authoritarian person who goes, no, it's those rich liberals who are the problem. And it's like, yeah, not wholly untrue, but also
yeah.
I say this as a like embittered geriatric millennial who's who's renting, and comparatively I'm doing okay, but also I look at my like parents' generation and just go like, you had it pretty good,
yeah.
and you did not protect it for like the following generation.
No, but just like the funny thing about like this chapter is it's also like you did not protect the following generation, but you did not protect other people. Like one of the things he says, like this chapter, it's directed at the other kind of rich liberals, where he says, you point out and you say, okay, we all agree this is bad, but can you blame you're blaming all the people of Russia, but how can you point your finger when you didn't do anything? And he's even like pretty harsh, like, okay, yeah, like if you came around when we invaded Ukraine, you were already too late. Where were you for Chechnya? Where were you for everything else that set up like what we live under? Like, how can I agree? We all like, and he's basically like, I'm in your shoes. Like, okay, we all agreed this is bad, but what did we ever do? And there's this point really early on in the book where I think this is the first Chechen war. He says, quote, Back then, the authors of such plans stuff like how to create peace in the First Chechen War, were overrunning the editorial offices of Moscow-based publications. They believed the craziness could easily be stopped if only as many people as possible were presented with the correct analysis, then everyone would come to their senses and the war would immediately come to an end. So, he's kind of taking to task this, like, kind of this sense of like, oh, we have enough education and we know how to stop this, but if people would just listen to us. And you're looking back and it's like, of course, a witty remark. Of course, a smart plan was not going to stop it. That was not what was doing it. Like, it was the system of power, the advantages, even frankly, the stupidity that led to this. It's kind of, you can't get into their head if they're not in there. Like, that wasn't, they didn't, the First and Second Chechen Wars, Yeltsin did not undertake the First Chechen War because he had a great grandiose plan, which he simply could have been convinced of a better one and everyone went along with it. It was a lot baser than that. And that's kind of why people went along with it. It kind of reminds you, there's this great line, like this taking the task of these like wealthy liberals. There's this great, have you ever listened to Phil Oakes?
No.
Okay. He's got this great line in this song, Love Me, I'm a Liberal. It kind of introduces it and it says, the American liberal, but I think this kind of goes for the liberal anywhere. 10 degrees to the left of center in good times and 10 degrees to the right of center when it affects them personally. Which is like this book. It's like full of like these, of course there's the state and he's like pointing out like, there's these other things. There's these military officers. There was the KGB and the downstream, like these other people. But all of his compatriots are people who are complicit and are like, this is obviously bad, but I've got my house, I've got my kids, I got something to think about, I got to keep my head down. And he's saying, well, that's why we're in this state, because we all think I've got something to lose, so I should keep my head down until times are better.
Yeah.
And they just don't get better.
No. Yeah. And it's like, okay, it might be a more extreme form over there, but there is also just like, oh yeah, there's some pretty universal application of this, having just lived through the times we have lived through.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like that's I was thinking, I was like, wow, I'm so glad that Ali chose this book, because this is, despite being written in 2015, feels just as relevant, maybe more relevant, kind of universal. Obviously, even though it's very, very more in the particulars. Like that, I was laughing when I read the Ksenia Sobchak, because this is like so, like I said, you don't necessarily need to know these things, but if you're enmeshed in like Russian current, I mean, this is like a little outdated now, but like he's naming names. He's not like making up theoretical things. It's like, oh, Ksenia Sobchak was there, and of course that means that, she was fighting for the liberalism. She was running for, I don't think she was running for president at this time, but like, it's really tied into all these polite liberal efforts to make things better, which effectively didn't do anything. Because they were, I mean, maybe you could point to different reasons. This is kind of getting like editorializing what could they have done better. All he's saying really is what we didn't work, of trying to be smarter, of trying to have a more articulate Russian. And of course, if we speak nicely and we have good plans, then things will turn around. And of course, if it gets too hot, we'll put our heads down until the heat goes away. Then we can pop back up and try again. Didn't work.
Yeah. And so it goes.
Yeah, right. And maybe this is, do you want to kind of start, this is not talking about the end itself, but maybe I really want to talk about Vadik, and this we'll have to eventually get to.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, he has been underserved by this episode. Yeah, so far. Let's rectify it. Let's make it right.
Yeah, exactly. Let's make and if you're going past this part, we're probably going to talk about the ending. It's going to come up, so be aware if that's something you're concerned about.
Hyper spoiler alert issued.
Yes, Vadik. What an interesting guy.
Mm-hmm.
The terrorist to the book is like, was right, essentially. Not a good person, not doing the right things necessarily, but is kind of the sort of the hero of the book.
Yeah. In a, which is a very, that's a very, it's a bold decision to be euphemistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's again, like Pasha taking himself to task, because he's so patronizing about this guy. He's just like, oh yeah, he's just like this rube from the sticks. And like, there's a bit where a couple of times, like within the space of a couple of pages, compares Vadik to a dog. Like he like at one point Vadik does this like impressive thing, and it's like a talking dog,
Right.
and it's just like it's so patronizing. And then later he talks about Vadik as just like this stray that he and Zhenya picked up, and I was interested in that. Is I sort of wondered whether this was like, because he also talks about like what's in Vadik. You know, we never knew what was in Vadik's heart, and just the use of that phrase and a dog and him being a stray. I'm just, is this a little bit of a riff on Bulgako's Heart of a Dog?
Right.
Because it is, but it's kind of like flipping that and going, actually, this person who you really underestimated, he's way smarter than you give him credit for. So it's actually a sort of a critique of that sort of idea of like the sort of dumb Russian mujik who doesn't know anything.
Right.
And it's just going like, no, he's a human just like you. He may not have had a fancy education like you. And this is one of the things actually is like, I think Zhenya, who like comes back at Pasha. Actually, I don't think it is Zhenya, but it's one of the other characters who's kind of like made compromises that Pasha won't make, and they go, yeah, actually, I think it's to do with like being in it, working with the KGB. Yes, it is about working with the KGB. It's like it's okay for folks like you who are Muscovites. Because it's like you have social capital that you can rely on. We don't. We have to take our breaks where we can, and just it's easy to be like judgmental from a position of privilege.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Because as we learn, I'm gonna get his backstory a little wrong because I should have written it down. But he comes from not a great family. I think it's in Archangel. Like he comes from a very rural part of Russia. I think it was Arkhangelsk or something. I forget exactly, but his parents are not really around. I think his father's dead or left. His he doesn't really get along with his mother. He did not come from a good, with the rest of them. He did not come from a good family background that set him up for success. And then he joins the military, as we learned through the flashbacks of the book. I'm kind of putting them all together in one spot for us. He joins the military, does not get along well with desserts, and goes to I don't know if he's in Chechnya and desserts. That's why we find out later on that he wasn't exactly a POW. He kind of was in the military, left, and ended up in Chechnya with his AK. And he was kind of there by choice. I don't know. By the time he's basically being bought and sold for physical labor, I don't know if that was he's still doing his own thing, but he went there of his own free will initially. And after he kind of gets in Zhenya and Pavel bring him back to Moscow, and they let him sleep in their closet at their workplace.
Which again is they think they're being really massive benefactors rather than questioning the system whereby someone is reduced to living in a janitor's closet and just going, oh yeah, that's fine. That's just, it's fine for Zhenya, rather than just being
yeah, he's like our office dog. Keep him in our closet.
Yeah. It's just essentially the Russian working class you think of as subhuman is essentially, it's they're poor, so they're not like us.
Yeah, they can sleep in a closet. It's fine.
It's fine.
Yeah. They're we tried to help him. So we tried to find him a job and he wasn't good at it, which of course, you're trying to find him a job in a professional world where his skill set is maybe he can shoot a gun. It's not even clear he ever learned to shoot that well when he was in the military. He doesn't have the skill sets. Yeah.
And also just knowing the things that you say and things that you don't say, and just all of those, social shibboleths that if you're just university educated Muscovite, you just take these things for granted.
Yeah, and then when the economy gets bad, of course they still have jobs, they've got skills, but they're Vadik, he doesn't have any skills. He's got great work ethic, no skills, so no one hires him, and he's basically a leave. He gets married, and then he kind of disappears. And what you find out is what happens is that he's seems to be okay with married life until one day when he's trying to go walk to pick his wife up. He gets stopped by the cops, doesn't have his ID, wife shows up. She has his ID, but now they're arresting him because he's not registered to live in the city because of a family situation, which is like, yeah, okay. Sometimes the paperwork doesn't always get filed. Like that's, any of us could be in that. Like there's so much paperwork we have to file for so many things. It could happen to anyone. He gets arrested for that. He gets arrested for resisting arrest, which was because him saying, hey, can I just go get my wife? She's going to be worried. And when they say, okay, like, all right, well, whatever, you can pay us a fine. We'll, just give us 800 rubles. And he says, I don't have any money. And they said, all right, well, and he's like, oh, you've got your wife. Why don't you basically they're like, your wife services us sexually and we'll let you go. And he's like, freaks out.
We'll call it even.
Yeah, we'll call it even. And he freaks out, obviously, and he attacks them, and they beat him into unconsciousness. And then while he's unconscious, they rape his wife, which eventually she hangs herself after that. And he murders the guy, the sergeant who did that, and kind of goes back to Chechnya. And that leads into this whole thing where eventually he gets, and we can come back and talk about this in the particulars, but he gets involved with some Ukrainian nationalist militia fighting in Chechnya, who bring him back to Ukraine to Rivne. And he kind of works on a farm where they're training paramilitaries, essentially, who are going, it never explicitly stated, but are going to fight probably in Donetsk or in the Donbass region somewhere against like the other paramilitary forces, which is how he gets the skills and training and the men to go undertake this, seizure of the church.
Yeah.
Eventually.
And yeah, there's Ukrainian nationalists like see something that like the smart Muscovite set do not. They're just like, oh no, this guy is smart and capable, and we have a use for him. Because and that's the thing is the book also is not like, it very much respects like Ukrainian like wish to be like and right to be their own independent country, but it also does not oversimplify an independent struggle as being like full of completely beyond reproach. Like it's horrible but like darkly funny, like this thing that they do to some like prisoners who kind of had done a terrible thing. They'd like sexually assaulted some people, but they are subjected to like this humiliating and like horrible revenge before then being like summarily executed. So it's just kind of like, yeah, this is this is not oversimplifying things.
Yeah. And also, too, like the group he joins, or I don't know if it's the group he's working with, but the first Ukrainian nationalist like militia members he meets are from a real organization. They're named like it's a real, like somewhat right-wing paramilitary organization. I don't know how active they are now, but during that, which is like also it's getting at the reality of also what this war is like, because it has not always been the same. Because before the full-scale invasion, I was studying this, and one of the things that was kind of a hard conversation to have is when we're talking about the Donbass region, like the heavy presence of like right-wing militias, which I was like, also everyone's like, well, it's a good fight. I was like, yeah, it's a good fight, but like you understand why more radical people tend to be drawn to armed conflict than the average person, in Ukraine and Russia, like they're trying to get by, and maybe there are a few who are like, I'll join the military, I'll do a good service, but if you're like there's a lot more people who are attracted to fighting war in their own ways who tend to be radical, like tend to be political extremists. And that is the reality that the struggle at this point for a lot of paramilitaries, not nice, kind, moderate people.
Yeah, there's a certain attraction to violence, and it's just like you'll find like the violence is the attraction, and you'll find the ideology that will allow you to do it in the name of a good cause.
Yeah, give you the gun. And like that's what I'm saying is like, yeah, which is like, I think one of the things I appreciate about this book is that it's not really trying to like, it's sympathetic. It's also not trying to whitewash it. Like the people fighting this are not nice kind. There are nice kind of people getting involved. The family that Vadik worked for appears to be pretty on the up and up. They treat him kindly. They seem to have a good family unit. The daughter who's trying to be a doctor, when I think it's Euromaidan, she gets involved and she's shot by a sniper and is paralyzed by that. Like they are trying to, she appears to be doing like the nice liberal way of like, she's going to protest. She's getting involved And it's not really saying she's wrong for doing that, but it's also like, and she gets shot too.
Yeah.
It's like it's everyone here is facing their own fight and their own danger for this, not really pointing out like, I don't know, moral judgment's not the right word. It's just trying to be kind of honest about what the nature of the struggle, which I appreciate.
Yeah, and again, going back to the noir thing, it's just relentlessly honest about just what a bleak place the world can be and is for many people, and you can try to do the best you can and still end up in a really terrible situation. And it's one of those, well, who am I to say if I hadn't been through, he's a fictional character obviously, but like what Vadik had been through, how do I know that I wouldn't have taken the path that he does? Because like, yeah, that's that policeman just, he pretty much deserved what happened to him. You know, I do not endorse violence, but you know, if anyone is deserving of it, that guy is. And yet the way it's depicted in the book is just like Vadik does it and then just feels like this utter revulsion. It's like he doesn't enjoy a second of it. He's just like, right, well, that's happened now.
Which is notable because I think that's the only act of violence Vadik undertakes in the book. I mean, you could say, obviously, taking hostages is a violent act, true. But this is where I kind of say he kind of is the hero of the book because getting towards the end, no one is, despite the threats, no one is actually hurt. And to me, it's a gray area whether or not anyone was ever going to be hurt. Because it kind of, and this is, maybe we can have a debate over this, but it's really, the way the book ends, it's unclear to me whether or not that was, it seems to me that was almost the ending they expected, because they accept it immediately when that fate comes around. But like after Pavel comes and says, "Hannah, why don't you release the children?" They're like, "Okay, yeah, sure, let him go." When there's a woman who gets a nosebleed because she's too panicked, they let her go, and eventually they let everybody go right before the building is shelled. And that's like, we can come back to that in a second. Maybe we want to wrap up more so, because that's I think kind of like a final conversation. But like, it does seem today that Vadik is kind of like, maybe moral paragon is too strong of a word for this, but he's like, he goes through worse things than everyone else. Everyone else in the book, Pavel and all his friends were trying to avoid a rough life. Vadik just lives it. He comes from a bad home life, goes in the military. It sucks for him there. He goes to Chechnya. He gets sold into slavery. He comes back, lives in a closet in Russia, tries to form his own life. You know, he's harassed by the police, and then he fucks off to Ukraine, and things go okay for him there. And he's like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, he is the person everyone else is trying to avoid living his life. And he's the one who turns it into something good, rather than everyone else who just like lives in their half lives, just trying to keep their heads down. Whereas he eventually says, no, I'm not taking this anymore. I'm going to do something about it.
Yeah, I want to just quote from the afterword, which is by Ludmila Ulitskaya, who I must admit I haven't read anything about her, so I don't know the context, but I was struck by this bit of writing. So it's the very end. It's, quote, "The hero commits a personal act of terror that is tantamount to an act of self-immolation because he is held captive by one of the most seductive ideas there is, the idea of justice. But he does not find justice. There is no answer. Only one thing is constant. Evil begets evil. A small act of evil begets a larger act, ad infinitum. Look into your heart. Don't we all bear responsibility for the bitterness and rage that surrounds us?"
Who's to blame?
Yeah. It's it's like a, I don't know, a reckoning with like futility, and like Vadik sort of gets what he wants, because he sends out this text message saying like, our conditions were we'd release everyone if the president apologized for the 2 wars. He refused to do it. So that's who your leader is. You now know. And then they release everyone anyway. So it's achieved something, but surely you knew that was who the leader was anyway, that he was never going to do that. You just proved it beyond, plausible deniability or reasonable doubt or whatever.
I mean, maybe it's a bringing home of, because this is like where in the question in my mind, if they ever intended to hurt anybody, or if this was like the goal was when they had the demand, apologize for that. They kind of like, the idea is we always knew he was going to say no. So this is our plan. We do this, and we it's a nice, like, outside of Moscow. These are probably people who are not like me. These are people who are like Pavel, like Zhenya. These are nice, upstanding, maybe liberals who are part of the system. And just because you think you keep your head down, that doesn't buy you safety. Anyone like me, all they'd have to do is apologize. It means nothing, except it means everything to people like him. You are not safe under this system. And then he lets them go, knowing that, like, because up to this point in the book, the Russian forces outside, they were like, some of them are going to die. It's going to be like, it's not going to be great. Like, they've already taken that for granted that some of these hostages are going to die.
Yeah.
Like the rescuers have taken it for granted. They're all making it out. Whereas, the irony possibly being the terrorists have taken them a hostage intend for nobody to get hurt except for potentially themselves, knowing that this is a suicide mission, because they send everybody out. And like the final moment is Vadik, I don't have the exact quote written down, but basically telling, like, Pavel, you have credibility now. You were here. You were the one who negotiated. You were the one who got them. Essentially, people got released. People are going to see that way. Of course, from their end, they're like, it seems like we were always going to let them go, but everyone's going to think you did this. You've got some moral authority now. And he pushes them out the door and says, go use it. And then he and the rest of the men he brought all die, and when they get shelled, which is a crazy thing to do in a hostage situation. We're like, let's bring out the mortars.
Yeah, no, I misinterpreted that. I missed something. I assumed that they, or I misread it, that it was like suicide bombing. But no. So
right.
Apologies if I've got that wrong.
I think you might be right. Actually, I don't think it says where the blasts come from. It just says they get pushed out and then there's an explosion.
Interesting.
No, I think it is then. Because in the chapter before, Vadik says we've got 40 minutes left. Okay, we have 40 minutes left until what? You'll find out. I need to ask you about something. So I think you're right. I think that is a suicide bombing, essentially. But one in which they let everyone go, and he says to him, don't forget why you came. People will listen to you now. Settle the score.
Yeah, but also knowing what we know about, like, those, like, previous siege situations and how the authorities have handled it. Like, it's the Dmitrovka theater siege where they just, like, used, like, essentially poison gas, and it's just like, oh, well, we got all of the terrorists, and the collateral damage is like hundreds of civilians, because the important thing is we got the terrorists. And yeah, not that they ever said any of this, but that was clearly the message of, and that's another of the themes of the book, is just how cheap,
right,
like, human life is in that country, and has been for so long. But again, it does like beg the question in, like, our respective systems, like, how valued is human life if that human life does not have, like, the right social connections and whatever. Lots of questions, as I say.
Right. Yeah. No, like, it really puts forth into, like, who is, like, we all operate under this assumption. Maybe we all is a very telling statement I just said. We all of a good certain class assume the states we live under are there to protect us to a certain degree.
Yeah. It is interesting. Yeah, because there is I forget the exact point, but there's a point where Pasha comments about the nature of we, and that it's kind of like this very convenient kind of, like, coverall that sort of just provides that little bit of plausible deniability, and kind of like, well, we're all responsible, aren't we? It's like, yeah, but you can only affect so far outside of yourself.
Yeah, like we like on one hand you got Pavel who works for maybe not a particularly like well performing newspaper, but works in the elite media class, having dinner with Putin. Granted, when he's not the Putin, but he's having dinner with Putin versus Vadik, who is the underclass. And when you say we
conscripted. Yeah. And can't get out of it by just having like his like friendly doctor write him a sick note, for instance. What can we possibly say about like about people who get themselves out of conscription with sick notes and don't have to go and fight in imperialist wars. Sorry, Cameron.
No, it's okay. Yeah, no, I mean it's exactly
editorializing.
I'm fighting the urge because I'm like naming like this whole idea of we operate on, again, I keep like there is an assumption that many people in societies operate on it, that the state is there for their protection, and it technically is, unless you run afoul of any of the systems underneath them. I mean, I'm thinking of, to editorialize a little bit, like immigration's rate in the U.S. are now reaching the point where just earlier this week, the ICE was descended on like a building with a helicopter, kicked down every door, and just arrested everyone in the entire building to figure out they call that targeted raid, but it was arresting everyone, putting people in a different racially, like depending on their race, putting them in different bands and figuring out who had papers and who didn't have papers later, putting children and other things like, and then like so on one hand you're like, oh, okay, well that's bad because if you're a citizen that's not supposed to happen to you, and then you get, like on one hand you've got like the we, it's not really protecting we, but of course that we also gets to hide. It should never have happened in the first place. It didn't matter if you have papers or not. If you're living your life, why should any state have any right to fly a helicopter over your building and blow down your door with explosives and take away you from your children, regardless of whether or not you've got papers, or one person in your family doesn't have papers. And that's like where that we, like you're saying, that we gets so pernicious that it's like it's so easy to say like, like, oh well, this is bad because someone who had the papers that might have happened to, which hides the fact that it shouldn't have happened regardless.
Yeah, and this is going back to something we were talking like pre-recording, mm-hmm. And so I'm getting this secondhand from Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast, is like Mikhail Bakunin's critique of states and the fact and citizenship. It's like, no, not citizenship, humanity. Yeah. It's like you don't get to do that to somebody because they're not a citizen, and making that distinction, that artificial distinction about like who gets rights and who doesn't, is just like a moral abomination. And it's just like, yeah, this you just see so much evidence about it, of that idea. It's it even likes an enlightened self-interest, because you won't necessarily always be like the we who this could never possibly happen to.
Exactly, yeah. Once the cages are built, the cages are built.
Yeah. And they're not going to fill themselves.
No. And so, Not Russian, what is the solution? Not Russian does not have a solution, but the sort of hero of the book, Vadik, who says, I'm not Russian anymore, you are the ones doing it to us, which also is like, when he says you, he means you, the Russians, but he also, I think there's also an undercurrent of you, the elite liberals, who put your head down, like you guys who are close, like you're saying, who live in the systems of power, and looked away and treated me like a stupid kid, despite like the fact that I went through horrific things. He's not saying all this, but like Pavel went through really, like anyone else, you walk away, this is horrific stuff. Like 1/5 of his story, and then he lives through the other 4/5. You are doing this. You were doing it to me as an underclass. You're doing this to me as someone who is now, not like I'm Ukrainian now. I'm fighting with Ukrainian nationalists, but like I am no longer of your country, and I'm fighting against everything you stand for. You need to go use your influence to go settle the score, and settle the score with whom, how to do it. There's no answer for that, but you got to do something. You can't do nothing. It's kind of where the book leaves us.
And to loop back to the like noir and film noir theme, this whole book reminded me of the quote at the end of David Fincher's Seven, and it's a great like film noir line, but it's I don't know, probably at 30 years removed, maybe it's tired. So stop me if you have heard this before.
No.
But it's where a different world-weary narrator, Morgan Freeman's character, says, quote, Hemingway once wrote, quote, "The world's a fine place and worth fighting for," end quote. I agree with the second part. That's sort of like the vibe of this book.
Yeah.
In a nutshell is yeah. But even then, sorry, I'm kind of like adding a coda to my coda. Like, one of the things I wanted to mention, because we've talked so much about the bleakness, I've talked about the humor and that being like a really attractive thing.
Right.
And it's not like Russians have a monopoly on dark humor. It's just like, I think it's another pretty human thing, but it's something that hadn't made it into like British stereotypes of what Russians are like. It's just like, they're morose, they like to drink, and that was about like what I knew about Russia growing up. But the beauty of the country, and that was something that kind of celebrates like very much in passing. Like there's the chapter on the flashback to Nikolskoye, the setting for this action, the reason that Vadik's chosen this place is that this is a very important place in both his and Pasha's story, because it's kind of like this rural sort of almost idyll. So it's going to be a longer one, but I just, with all this kind of like darkness, I wanted to, because I miss Russia. Like, I wish it had not taken the path that it did. I wouldn't take back the 5 years I spent there. I was greatly privileged to have experienced that place and that culture, and I don't want to be like perpetuating the like, oh yeah, this place is basically Mordor,
right? Because
it's like, it's not Mordor.
Yeah. Well, also like it kind of, because like when the war started, I was working in news, people come to me, is like, what is it about like Russians that make them do this? And I was like, I think both, like, one, no, it's not like there's some genetic condition which makes Russians warlike people, but also that removes the fact that people made these choices, and not just people on high, everyone involved, just like we as a society make our choices. It's not a genetic thing. It's not this like racial, like, they do this. People made choices, and this is where we are. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. But they even, he even refers to, I think it's, Pasha says this, I think it's in the context of the KGB recruitment thing of he essentially goes, well, Marx was right about one thing. He doesn't quite say it that way, but like people do not choose their environment, and like their range of options is circumscribed by those circumstances. So yes, this is the passage.
Okay, yes.
So, a long time ago, Valera Siliantiev, who grew up in Litkano, showed me the church in Nikolskoye. Back in his childhood, he and some other guys from the opposite bank of the Moscow River would swim over to the church, although back then it wasn't much, just a dilapidated skeleton. But even so, the ruins made an impression. Of course, I'm not an expert on old Russian architecture, but it was really beautiful. Before all the dams and reservoirs, when the Moscow River would flood in the spring, water would cut off Nikolskoye from the rest of the world. The church was built on the highest point, right above the beginning of the floodplain, and the view from the bell tower extended at least 10 kilometres. If you ignored the cooling towers of the power plant in Dzerzhinsky, the view was spectacular. And you could see the fields and the hills between Litkana and Vidnoye and the other churches on the opposite bank of the Moscow River. And the church itself was very attractive. I've never seen architecture like that anywhere else. Sharp lines, hard corners, nothing was smooth, but the impression it created was one of lightness, airiness, dapper elegance. It looked more like a mosque than an Orthodox church. I used to go to Nikolskoye often, on spring vacation or in early September when it was still hot, or just for weekends. It was so close, just 30 minutes by a ring road, but the place was exceptional. There were views and the church, and you could get to the river through the meadow. The dogs were happy, and as a rule, the girls liked it too. Places like this are meant to be shared, and I used to drag everyone I liked there. It's that whole it's a place worth fighting for. And also I kind of like, and I don't know whether this is a real place because there's so many real places and figures in this book that I wouldn't be surprised if it was. But if it is fictional, I love that he added the detail of just being like the one place that's part of the view is a place called Dzerzhinsky, named after the first head of the Cheka. It's just like, even in this beautiful place, there's nothing that is completely unspoiled. So it's that, like, there is beauty, but there's still this, like,
yeah.
And the cooling towers, yeah. There's nothing perfect, but there's some stuff that you can be enjoyed and that's worth celebrating and worth protecting, and Vadik has decided that this place, it can no longer be. Well, he's complicating it further because it was, as I've literally just said, it was not wholly uncomplicated. He's just complicated that bit more, to put it mildly.
Yeah, right.
And yeah, I don't know where to go from there.
I think that's kind of the end of the book. It's kind of a good wrap up, which is, where do we go from here? It's not certain. We don't know, but you just can't do nothing.
Yeah. Complacency is how we're in this mess.
Yeah, exactly. Complacency is complicity. There we go. That was but thank you. This was a good pick. I'm glad you chose this.
I'm really, to pat myself on the back. I'm really glad that I got to talk about this because it made such an impression, and I was like, I always doubt my own judgment, but like, I'm sure I'm not wrong about this book. So I'm so glad that it had a similar impression on you, and I hope that this
not in the least.
will, persuade a couple more people to pick it up, and also support their local independent bookstore in the process, because that's a small change that you can be, is like not give all of your money to like massive corporations, or at least give a smaller fraction.
Right? Yeah. To be like, I try not to buy from anything from. Yeah. I try not to buy from big online retailers. I try to buy as much like in person as possible, and it's a small thing, but like, start figuring out where. I mean, I don't like giving advice because I don't think advice is, you can make it up on the spot and say whatever you want, but it's not like fighting capitalism, but not everything needs to be a perfect Bolshevik fight against. You can make small effects where you are, and figure out where your big battles and small battles are, and maybe one of your small battles can be not using Amazon.
I do love giving advice. But yeah, and full disclosure, like, much of my salary, that's it was coming from people's Amazon purchases, so I am also complicit. Right. So I am like doing my penance, right, and going like, support independent bookshops, because anything you can do to kind of like slightly decentralize power and make sure slightly less money is trickling upwards is a bit that you can do. Although one of the things I've noticed being in the book trade for nearly a decade now in the UK is that certain kinds of towns and cities have independent bookshops, and certain places do not, and that says a lot about the society we have built for ourselves. So there you go. To end this thing on a downer.
It's complicated. There's a nice, we can metaphorically speaking, stuff like choosing, spend your money in places where you're not supporting big business. It's like Nikolskoye, but Dzerzhinsky is still there.
It is. Yep. And his statue, it might not be outside of the Lubyanka anymore, but yeah, the Russian authorities have moved it out of the statue park to some like military training academy, so it's like, he's still out there.
Yeah. All right, maybe that's a good place to leave it for now.
Yeah, for now. See you later. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I do hope you've enjoyed the conversation. As promised, I'm going to close this episode with an explanation of why it's barely scraped over the line as a Noirvember release. So, my own November, you might say, has been dark and full of intrigue. And that has been due to the situation around my day job. I found out at the beginning of the month that my job was at risk. Fortunately, the UK has some reasonably robust employment laws, certainly compared to the US, where I know many of you will be listening from. So I've been able to mount a case for why my role should be retained, and my trade union representatives have been extremely helpful and supportive. It has, however, as you might imagine, been rather stressful and draining, and at the time I'm releasing this episode, I don't know the outcome of that process. As a neurodiverse person with some working memory challenges and quite a bit of social anxiety in certain situations, I've not always had the easiest time in the job market in the past. I feel the way about job applications and especially about job interviews the way a lot of folks feel about exams, i.e., I know candidate suitability has to be assessed somehow, but I wish this wasn't the way it's done. So, I probably will need to find a new day job, and that means it could potentially be some time before I release a new episode. If you're a long-time listener, you'll be aware this isn't the first time I've felt the need to take a lengthy podcasting hiatus, and I'm hugely grateful to everyone who's stuck around with the show over the years. You'll have also noticed that over the last couple of years, I've used this feed to promote various screenings, live events, and other cultural things that broadly fit with the subject matter and themes of the show that are going on in my neck of the woods and in the UK more generally, and occasionally in the US too. I would love to get to the point where this show and my other film-related activities provide me with enough income to dedicate more time and energy to them. I'm quite a ways from that now, and in the years following the pandemic, the flood of businesses and other institutions into the podcasting space has turned into an utter deluge, making it increasingly challenging for independents on specialist topics such as me and this show to get discovered and grow their audiences. So, I'm using this opportunity to test the water. If you've been a listener to this show for a while and you value what I'm doing with it, please give me your financial support if you're able to. There are a couple of ways you can do that, and one more if, like me, you're based in the UK. First, you can give a one-off donation of about the price of a cup of coffee, or several if you like, by going to my Ko-Fi page. That's ko-fi.com. And you just search Russian Soviet Movie Podcast on there. I've also finally gotten around to setting up a Patreon page, and that is patreon.com, Ali Pitts Movies, etc. And the link to that is in the show notes. It's the same as my Instagram handle. If you're in the UK, you can buy a book from my meticulously curated bookshop.org selection, and I get a commission on every sale. And that is uk.bookshop.org. If this episode has whet your appetite to read Not Russian, you can find that on there. Or you could grab yourself a copy of Oxford University Press's A Very Short Introduction to Film Noir by James Nairmore there. I appreciate that for many folks, financial support is not an option. If that's the case for you, please do rate and ideally write a short but glowingly positive review of the show wherever it is that you listen to it. If you're time poor as well, I can definitely relate to that too, but taking a moment to hit the like button or equivalent on whatever app you're listening to this on would be a great and quick way to show support to the show. And for everyone listening, word of mouth recommendations to other film fans in your life are super helpful. Given the rather stressful situation I just described a moment ago, I would be extremely grateful for the encouragement. If I check in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or Podchaser in a couple of weeks and find a fresh batch of enthusiastic reviews, that will absolutely make my day. All right, I'm going to ask you to pause the podcast and go and do one of those things, providing that you're not listening to this while driving, for example, and it's safe for you to do so. I'll still be here when you get back, and I'll have a handful of recommendations to keep you occupied while I'm away from podcasting and figuring out how to keep those bills paid. Okay, great. Thank you for doing that and for putting up with me bringing the emotional thumbscrews to bear on the situation a teensy bit. As promised, I'm about to use some hideous corporate speak, deliver some value with some recommendations to keep you going while I'm off the air. First of all, the Slavic Literature Podcast, obviously. You've just heard Cameron Lallana being insightful and brilliant, and there's a lot more of that available. They even have some movie-related episodes, including one on Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris and one on the delightfully bonkers Aelita, Queen of Mars, that we've covered here as well. If you dig deep into their back catalogue, you'll also find a chat I had with them on a couple of adaptations of Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, one of which was adapted for the screen by the great Tom Stoppard, who sadly passed away the day before the release of this episode. Next up, as someone who grew up in the UK, I am a huge supporter of the public service broadcasting that the BBC provides, and so I'm recommending Professor Geoffrey Hosking's 6-part series of Reith lectures from 1988 called The Rediscovery of Politics. It tracks the development of glasnost and perestroika following Gorbachev becoming General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1985. As we discussed earlier, the protagonist of Not Russian revisits the 1980s a couple of times in flashback. I stumbled upon this series in around 2010, early on in my time in Moscow, and I can't recommend it highly enough. And in a bit of independent movie podcaster solidarity, I'd like to recommend the show Her Head in Films. The host, Caitlin, is primarily into art house and independent cinema, so if you like my show, I suspect you'll find something to enjoy in her back catalogue. As it's Noirvember for a few more hours, I'll point you towards her episodes on David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, Jane Campion's In the Cut, which are definitely both neo-noirs. There's also an episode on Michael Curtiz's Casablanca, which, if not actually noir, is certainly noir adjacent. Links for all the things I've mentioned are, as always, in the show notes. All right, thanks for listening. That's the show. I'm going to play you out with a short clip from a film noir-inspired favourite of mine, Private Investigations by Dire Straits. Their frontman, Mark Knopfler, of course, is a film composer as well, most notably for the wonderful Princess Bride and equally wonderful Local Hero. Take care, and das Vidania, folks.
What have you got?